All right, so here is the grammar lesson that I just wanted to recapitulate and make sure we completely understand. Because if we understand this, then we understand all of the grammar necessary for pretty much a lot of writing, but also just for the ACT and SAT. All right, so we start with our independent clause, and you gave me an example of an independent clause. I like cheese. This is great. I love this sentence. Give me an example of another different independent clause. I like reading books. Great. And what makes something an independent clause? There's a subject. So what's the subject?
I
Good. What's the verb?
like.
Great. And that's it. And then pretty much if you have a subject and a verb and express a complete thought like this, then you've got it. Subject, something to act. And then verb, so what the thing that acts does. And then complete thought. Does it actually make a coherent thought? All right. So this is great. You totally nailed this idea here. And there are three main ways that we connect these independent clauses. What are the three ways we can connect these? I showed you the first one. It is a period, capitalization. That's what we've done here. So basically, how do we connect I like cheese, I like reading books? Because we couldn't just shove them together. No. So instead, what we do is we put a period here, and then we capitalize this letter, and that's the first way. The second way is actually semicolon. Remember this? So how would that look? It's like the same exact thing. So but yes, so there we go. And then there's a third way that we can connect independent clauses. What was the third way we could connect them? Do you remember? Comma fanboys, you got it. So I like cheese, and for instance. And so comma fanboy, what does a comma fanboy mean? Yeah, good. For, and, nor, but, or, yet. So these are the fanboys. So comma, and in this case, is a comma fanboys. Brilliant. Really good work here. Really good work. And so these are the three main ways that you can connect independent clauses. All right, now there are exceptions. So I'll put an asterisk here. And what are the two exceptions? Do you remember? The colons and em dashes. Okay. And why do these have asterisks by them? Well, because as long as you start with an independent clause, you can actually end with either an independent or a dependent clause, either one, independent or a dependent. You can end with either clause. Okay. That's why these have an asterisk by them. Okay, these are actually interchangeable too. Pretty much for every purpose that you could use a colon, you could use an em dash, vice versa. The only difference is that sometimes your em dashes have to be surrounded by another em dash at the end, whereas a colon, you never would end with another colon. That's kind of how they're different. Okay, but I like to think of these as equal signs. Okay, so like whatever is on the left here has to equal whatever's on the right. All right, so I'm going to give you some examples of a colon's usage. I like the best food in the world, colon, cheese. That is a great example of how to use this. And as you can see, in this case, I'm linking an independent clause to a dependent, right? Or you could say, there's one thing in the world I like, colon. I like watching people eat cheese. You know, that would not be the best example, but independent clauses can be connected to independence or dependence with colons. Now, also, you can do the same thing with em dashes, but em dashes are more for emphasis. Like, I was not hot, em dash, which kind of looks like this, but cold. It's like longer than a normal dash. All right, I was not hot, but cold gives you emphasis. You could also say something similar, like, there were 5 people at the restaurant. Maybe you could say there were 5 people at the restaurant, colon. And then you'd say list the names of the 5 people. All right, so these are just examples, and the independent clauses to colons and independent clauses to em dashes are kind of similar to anything goes, because as long as you start with an independent clause on the left side, then you can have emphasis on the right, independent clause, dependent clause, as long as they both kind of equal each other. I like to think of these as equal signs. Whatever's on the left has to kind of equal what's on the right. See how that's true?
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. They have to interface and explain each other. Now we go to our rules with dependent clauses and independent clauses. Okay, so let's say we want a dependent clause. How do we connect a dependent clause to an independent clause? What do you think?
Well, dependent clause is like not a full idea, right?
Technically, a dependent clause is a group of words that have a subject and a verb, but don't contain a complete thought. And I, for the past, have kind of been using it just as something that's not an independent clause, because on the ACT and SAT, it's just important to recognize the difference between independent clauses and clauses that need a little bit of help. So in this case, I'm referring to dependent clause or subordinate clause as something that just does not stand on its own. So how do we connect a dependent clause to an independent clause? Comma. That's it. You got it. You nailed it. It's just comma. Yeah, you got it. It's a comma. Well done. I like to think of just one example here that really nails it home for me is the sentence like this. I thought. Now, typically the rule is that if an introductory clause has like less than 4 words, then you don't have to use a comma. For all intents and purposes for the ACT and SAT, whenever you have an introductory clause whatsoever, you should always use a comma to connect it to an independent clause. So this is a perfect illustration of this point. When you start with a dependent clause, comma, and then go into independent. However, if you start with an independent and then go into a dependent, nothing should change. For instance, if we were to flip this around, I fought during the war. Does that look right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Whereas if you flip it around, we kind of need the comma here. So when dependent goes into independent, we typically need a comma. More specifically, when an introductory clause goes into an independent clause, then we do need a comma. Okay. So I'll give you an example of like, an adverbial clause. An adverbial clause would be like this. When the president arrives, I jump for joy or whatever. Okay. Basically, here's a dependent clause, right? An adverb clause. And here's an independent clause. That's perfect. But I jump for joy when the president comes. If we're flipped around, you wouldn't need the comma. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
All right. And this is pretty much everything that you need to know for the English section. There's only one other little bit here. And this is just unnecessary information. Okay. Unnecessary information. And so unnecessary information can be quarantined away in a couple of different ways. What are those ways? Do you remember them? I think we went over them last time. Parentheses, M dashes, commas. Okay. These are the 3 ways that we can set apart non-essential information. And so on the ACT and SAT, whenever you're looking at a sentence and it has stuff in the middle, and they'll underline like a question, and the question they're asking about is not, and this, you can just cross these out. Whoosh, cross them out. Because the subject of the sentence will never be in these unrestricted clauses. It will never be in these non-essential informations. Okay. And there's one last little bit. This is a really, really, really good tip here. I'll give you on the side. Tip. Cross out prepositions. So could you give me some examples of prepositional phrase?
I ran across the parking lot.
Across the parking lot would be a prepositional phrase. Here, I'll give you some examples of these. I'll give an example of prepositions or anything that can do this cup, right? So this pen can go under the cup, over the cup, around the cup, between the cup and the microphone, through the cup, into the cup, around the cup. Okay, so these are prepositions are basically the relationship of 2 objects in space, and that's a prepositional phrase. Okay, and in the beginning, before the fall, after the brutal fight, at school, down the side, across the street, inside your ear, outside the house, by chewing. These are all prepositional phrases. And you can actually cross out prepositional phrases. Why? Because the subject of the sentence is never within the preposition. So these are the tips that you need to know for the English section of the ACT and the writing section of the SAT. Okay, if you think about the exam like this, you will automatically just score a lot better than other students who do not conceptualize in this manner. Okay, so this is the way I want you to think about the exam going forth. Identify, first of all, what type of sentence do we have here? Do we have an independent clause? If we do, there are 3 ways to connect. None of these, then look at these exceptions, okay? And then secondly, if we have a dependent clause, then we have to use a comma and connect it to an independent clause. And then the only other thing to do to kind of give you some more context to try to solve the question is you can look at these tips, right? You can just cut out the unnecessary information. If it's surrounded by parentheses, cut it out. Surrounded by M dashes, cut it out. Surrounded by commas, cut it out. See if the sentence works by cutting it out. And if it does, then it's good grammar. If it doesn't, it's not good grammar. Cross out prepositions because the subject of the sentence is never within the prepositions. And then if you do all of these things, then you will for sure get a good score on this exam.